Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The train whistle shrieked, a piercing metallic cry that seemed to sever Elara from everything she had ever known. At 19, she felt less like a woman and more like a parcel, wrapped in gray wool and tied with the string of desperation. The landscape outside the window had shifted from the suffocating, soot-stained brick of the eastern city to an endless, terrified expanse of brown and gold. Wyoming Territory was not a place. It was an exposure. It hid nothing. And as the train began its shuddering deceleration toward the wooden platform of Black Creek, Elara felt that she, too, was about to be peeled open. She checked her reflection in the darkened glass. Pale skin, eyes that looked too large for her face, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile without trembling. She touched the letter in her pocket, the contract. It was signed by a man named Silas Thorne, a rancher, a man who needed a wife because the land was too large to face alone, and she was a girl who needed a home because the city had decided she was surplus. When she stepped onto the platform, the wind hit her first. It was dry and tasted of sage and dust. Then she saw him. He was not the polished gentleman she had foolishly imagined, nor was he the elderly widower she had feared. Silas Thorne was a mountain of a man, carved from the very geology of the territory. He wore a duster coat stained with the red earth, a hat pulled low over eyes the color of flint, and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. He stood by a wagon, watching the passengers disembark with a stillness that was almost predatory. Elara tightened her grip on her valise. She walked toward him, her legs feeling like water. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was a whisper, snatched away by the wind. He looked down at her. He didn't smile. He didn't tip his hat. He simply looked, his gaze sweeping over her from the scuffed tips of her shoes to the stray lock of hair escaping her bonnet. It was an assessment. He was checking the livestock. "You're smaller than your letters made you sound," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "I'm strong," she lied. "I can work." "We'll see," he said. He took her bag with one hand, tossing it into the back of the wagon as if it contained feathers. "Climb up." The ride to the homestead took 3 hours. They spoke perhaps 10 words. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the reality of their arrangement. This was a transaction. She was here to cook, to clean, to warm a bed, and to help tame a wilderness. In exchange, she received protection and a roof. It was a fair trade, the world said. But as the sun began to dip below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and blood, orange, Elara felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. The homestead was a stark silhouette against the twilight, a main house of rough-hewn logs, a massive barn, and miles of fencing that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was beautiful, in a lonely, aching way. "This is it," Silas said, pulling the horses to a halt. For the first 2 weeks, Elara existed in the house like a ghost. She moved silently, learning the creaks of the floorboards so she could avoid them. She cooked meals that Silas ate with mechanical efficiency, offering a nod of thanks but nothing more. He was out before dawn and back after dark, smelling of horses, sweat, and leather. She was terrified of him. Not because he was cruel, he had never raised his voice or a hand to her, but because of his sheer magnitude. He took up so much space. When he walked into a room, the air seemed to compress, and she, who had spent 19 years trying to shrink herself to survive the crowded tenements, felt like she was vanishing entirely. The nights were the hardest. They slept in the same room, in a large bed that felt like a battlefield during a truce. He stayed on his side, his back a wall of heat, and she clung to the edge, staring into the darkness, listening to the coyotes howl. He had not touched her yet. That too was a source of terror. The anticipation of the claim was worse than the act. itself might have been. She wondered if he found her lacking, or if he was simply biding his time, waiting for her to falter. The breaking point came in the 3rd week. A storm had been brewing for days, a pressure headache in the atmosphere. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind began to scream around the corners of the cabin. Elara was in the kitchen, trying to knead dough for bread, but her hands were shaking. The windows rattled in their frames. Silas came in early. The door slammed shut behind him, cut loose by the gale, and the sound was like a gunshot. Elara jumped. Her elbow knocked the heavy ceramic mixing bowl off the table. Time seemed to slow. She watched it fall, a white moon plummeting to earth. It shattered on the floorboards with a deafening crash. Elara froze. The flour dusted the floor like snow. The shards lay there, jagged and accusing. In the city, in the orphanage where she had spent her childhood, a broken bowl meant no dinner. It meant the cane. It meant being told she was clumsy, useless, a waste of space. She dropped to her knees, her hands scrabbling for the pieces, not caring as the sharp edges sliced into her fingertips. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her breath coming in short, panicked hitches. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it. I'll pay for it. Please, I didn't mean to." Elara. She didn't hear him. The roar of her past was too loud. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Don't send me back. Please don't send me back." Elara. A pair of large, rough hands grabbed her wrists, halting her frantic gathering. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. It never came. Instead, she was hauled upward. She opened her eyes to find Silas staring at her, his expression not angry but intense, almost bewildered. He looked at her bleeding fingers, then at her face, wet with tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Stop," he said. His voice was firm but lacked a bite of fury. "It's a bowl. Just a bowl. It's broken," she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "I broke it. I break everything. I'm not good at this. I'm not what you paid for." Silas went still. He didn't let go of her wrists. He pulled her closer, forcing her to look at him. The storm raged outside, battering the walls, but inside the kitchen, the air was suddenly suffocatingly still. "What do you think I paid for?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "A wife," she stammered. "A woman who is strong, who doesn't jump at shadows, who doesn't break things." I'm empty, Silas. The city took everything before I got here. There's nothing left inside me but fear. You bought a shell." She tried to pull away, shame burning her face. She wanted to run out into the storm and let the wind carry her away. She felt used up, a scrap of fabric worn thin by a hard life, totally unworthy of this hard man and his hard land. Silas didn't let her go. He shifted his grip, his hands moving up her arms to hold her shoulders. He was warm, impossibly warm. He steered her backward until she was pressed against the sturdy oak table. He stepped into her space, crowding her, his large frame blocking out the rest of the room. "Look at me," he commanded. She forced her eyes up. His gray eyes were dark, swirling with something she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It was possession. "You think you're empty?" he asked. "You think you're just some broken thing that landed on my porch?" "Yes," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. He reached out, his callous thumb tracing the line of her jaw, catching a tear. The touch was electric, shocking in its gentleness compared to his size. "You've been running," he said. "I can see it in you. You've been running your whole life, even when you were standing still. You've let people carve pieces out of you until you think there's no territory left to defend." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. She could smell the rain on his skin, the scent of the storm. "I didn't bring you here to be a servant, Elara. I didn't bring you here to own a shell." His hands moved to her waist, heavy and anchoring. "I brought you here because this land, it requires life, and I saw life in those letters, buried under the politeness. I saw a fighter. I'm not fighting," she wept. "I'm surrendering." "No," he growled low in his throat. He pulled back slightly, his eyes locking onto hers with a ferocity that stopped her heart. You are done surrendering. Do you hear me? You are done giving pieces of yourself away to fear. You are done letting the past live in this house. He moved his hand to her chest, over her heart, feeling the frantic rhythm of it beating against her ribs. I claim every inch inside you, the cowboy said to the 19-year-old girl, his voice rough with an emotion that felt like gravel and velvet. As if you've never been afraid, as if you've never been hurt, as if you've never been anyone else's victim. Elara stopped breathing. The words hung in the air, heavier than the thunder. I claim the fear, Silas continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I'm taking it. It's mine now. I'll burn it out. I claim the doubt. I claim the memories of every person who made you feel small. I am evicting them. There is no room for them here. There is only room for you and for me. He wasn't talking about her body. She realized that with a jolt that went through her spine. He was talking about the architecture of her soul. He was laying claim to the devastating emptiness she felt, promising to fill it not with his own ego, but with a new foundation. Silas. Every inch, he repeated, intense and unyielding. I am going to fill this house, and I am going to fill your life, until you don't remember what it felt like to be hollow. You aren't a package, Elara. You're the land, and I protect my land. He took her bleeding hand, bringing it to his lips. He kissed the cuts, tasting the copper, his eyes never leaving hers. Now he's aid, stepping back just enough to let her breathe, though she didn't want him to go. We are going to bandage your hand. We are going to clean up this flower, and then we are going to eat dinner. And you are not going to apologize. Not once. Elara stood there trembling, but for the first time it wasn't from fear. It was from the shock of being seen, really seen. The cold draft from the window hit her back, but she didn't feel it. She felt scorched by his proximity. He walked to the basin, poured water from the pitcher, and returned with a cloth. He cleaned her hands with a tenderness that belied his size. He wrapped the cuts in strips of clean linen. Does it hurt? He asked. No, she said. And it was true. The pain in her hand was nothing compared to the seismic shift in her chest. That night, the storm raged for hours. The wind battered the cabin, piling drifts of snow against the logs, but inside the dynamic had shifted. They sat by the fire. Silas was mending a bridle, the leather passing smoothly through his hands. Elara sat opposite him, holding a book she wasn't reading. She watched him. She watched the way the firelight played on the sharp angles of his face. She watched the capability in his hands. He looked up, catching her stare. You okay? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. I feel different. Good. He went back to his work, but a moment later he spoke again without looking up. The bed is big enough, he said. You don't have to hang. Off the edge, Elara. You won't fall. I won't let you. Later, when the fire had died down to embers, they lay in the dark. The room was cold, the air biting. Elara lay on her side, stiff as a board, her usual position. But then she remembered his words. I claim the fear. She took a breath. It was a shaky, terrifying thing. She inched backward. She felt the heat radiating from him. She moved again until her back brushed against his chest. Silas didn't pull away. He didn't pounce. He simply exhaled a long, slow sound in the dark. His arm came over her, heavy and solid, pulling her back against him until there was no space left between them. He tucked her head under his chin. Sleep, he murmured into her hair. Elara closed her eyes. The wind howled outside, a beast trying to get in. But for the first time in 19 years, the beast wasn't inside her. The emptiness was gone, filled by the solid, unyielding weight of the man who held her. He had claimed the space where the nightmares lived, and in their place he had built a wall. She slept. Winter in Wyoming was an endurance test. The snow piled up to the windowsills, turning the world into a blinding white sheet. They were snowed in for weeks at a time. It was a claustrophobic existence that could drive people mad, but for Elara, It became a chrysalis. The claim Silas had made was not a singular event. It was a daily practice. When she flinched because a log popped in the fire, he would catch her eye and hold it until her heart slowed. When she started to degrade herself for a burnt biscuit or a missed stitch, he would interrupt her with a question about the ranch, forcing her to use her mind, to have an opinion, to be an equal. He was teaching her how to take up space. One evening, deep in January, Elara found a guitar in the back of a closet. It was dusty and missing a string. She brought it out to the firelight, wiping it down with a rag. Silas was reading a ledger at the table. He watched her. "My mother's," he said. "Do you play?" Elara asked. "No. Hands are too big. Never had the patience." Elara plucked a string. It twanged out of tune and melancholy. "I used to listen to the buskers on the street corners," she said softly. "I always wanted to learn, but, well, girls like me didn't get lessons." "You're not a girl like me anymore," Silas said. He closed the ledger. "If you want to play, play. It needs a string. I have wire in the barn. I'll fix it tomorrow." And he did. He spent the morning carefully winding a thin steel wire, his large fingers struggling with the delicate mechanism. But he didn't stop until it held a tune. He handed it to her like it was a weapon. "Make some noise," he said. Elara sat by the fire and strummed. It was clumsy at first. She didn't know the chords, but she found a rhythm. She hummed a melody she remembered from the city, a sad song about lost love. But here, in the cabin, it sounded different. It sounded defiant. "Shh." E looked up to find Silas watching her. The look on his face was the same as the night of the storm. Intense. Hungry, but not just for flesh. He was hungry for her presence. "You have a voice," he said. "I am trying to find it," she replied. "It's filling the room," he said. "Keep going." The physical intimacy came slowly, like the thaw of the river in spring. It wasn't demanded, it was arrived at. It happened on a morning when the Chinook winds blew over the mountains, melting the snow and turning the drifts into rushing water. The air was suddenly warm, smelling of wet earth and promise. Elara was on the porch shaking out a rug. The sun was hitting her face, and for the first time in months, she felt the heat of it. She closed her eyes, tilting her head back, letting the sun soak into her skin. She felt a lightness in her chest, a strange bubbling sensation. Happiness. It was happiness. She opened her eyes to see Silas walking up from the barn. He had stopped a few yards away. He was leaning on a fence post watching her. She didn't look away. She didn't look down. She smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners. Silas pushed off the fence and walked toward her. He moved with that deliberate, ground-eating stride. He walked up the steps, looming over her. "What?" she asked, her breath catching. "You smiled," he said. "Is that forbidden?" "No. It's the first time I've seen it, real anyway." He reached out and took the rug from her hands, tossing it over the rail. Then he took her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I told you," he murmured. "I'd clear out the ghosts. They're gone," she whispered. "Mostly good." He kissed her then. It wasn't tentative. It was a seal on the contract he had spoken weeks ago. It was heavy and deep, tasting of the morning air and the man himself. Elara didn't shrink. She rose on her toes, meeting him, her hands bunching in the fabric of his coat. She pressed herself against him, claiming him back. "I'm not empty anymore," she said against his lips. "No," he agreed, pulling her tightly against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "You're full of fire. I can feel it." The snow melted. The grass turned green. The calves were born slick and wobbling into the mud of the corral. Elara learned to ride. She learned to shoot a rifle, the kick of the stock against her shoulder bruising her but making her feel powerful. She learned that she could shout across a pasture and be heard. One afternoon, a peddler's wagon came up the track. The man was slick with eyes that darted around too much. He saw Elara on the porch and smirked. "Afternoon, missy," he called out, his tone dripping with a lack of respect that reminded her of the city foreman. The boss around, or just the help? Elara stood straight. She was wearing Silas's old work shirt, belted at the waist, and her hair was in a braid. She looked at the man, and she felt the old fear tried to rise, the instinct to apologize, to hide. But then she felt the ghost of Silas's hand on her back. "I claim every inch." She didn't step back. She stepped forward to the edge of the porch. "Mr. Thorne is in the north pasture," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "And I am not the help. I am Mrs. Thorne. And if you have business, you can state it to me. If not, you can turn that wagon around. We don't buy from strangers who don't know their manners." The peddler blinked, his smirk vanishing. He looked at the rifle leaning against the wall next to her, then back at her steel-gray eyes. He tipped his hat, looking suddenly nervous. "My apologies, ma'am. Just lost my way." "Then find it," she said. She watched him ride away. When she turned, she saw Silas sitting on his horse on the ridge, a silhouette against the blue sky. He'd been watching. He raised a hand in salute. Elara raised hers back. That night, lying in the dark, the windows open to the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle, Elara traced the scars on Silas's knuckles. "You saved me," she whispered. Silas shifted, pulling her on top of him so she could look down to his face. The moonlight silvered his eyes. "No," he said. "I just reminded you who you were before the world got its hands on you. I just cleared the brush. You grew the rest yourself." "You claimed me," she said. "Every inch," he confirmed, his hand resting possessively on the back of her neck. "And I always keep what's mine." "And what if I claim you?" she asked, a newfound boldness making her voice husky. Silas smiled, a rare crooked expression that cracked his stoic mask. "Darling," he rumbled, "you did that the moment you got off the train. I just had to wait for you to realize it." Elara laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She was 19, and she was in the middle of a wilderness that could kill a person without a second thought. But she was no longer a parcel. She was no longer a ghost. She was the land, and she was the storm, and she was home,